Welcome to another edition of Creative Mind. My name is Bobby Brill. And on this episode, we asked that question about virtual reality that we always seem to ask ourselves about virtual reality is, what is the state of virtual reality? What makes it interesting? Why is VR so important? And with all of the new tools coming out and with VR being more affordable and easier to use, it's a good question. And this time we talk with Phillip Kauffold. Phillip is somebody with a very long career in digital games, video games, rigging. He's a technical lead, and he's developed curriculum for technical animation, and virtual reality here at the Academy. So he really is an expert on this and somebody who's devoting a lot of time to answering this question of what makes VR useful, interesting, and so important. And before we get into our conversation, please take a moment to hit subscribe on whatever device you're listening to so you never miss an episode of Creative Mind. Here's Phillip. What was VR something that you were interested in before, or was it that push that really got you to dive deep into VR?
I was vaguely interested in it. It's kind of one of those things where I tend to give new technology a little bit of a hairy eyeball, just because I've seen so much come and go. It sounded interesting, but until I think once I tried it, and it kind of blew me away, and I really started thinking about what the possibilities could potentially be, and that's when why I really started getting into it.
Because for me, as kind of the old guy who doesn't play video games as much as a lot of people do, I still look at VR, and I think some people do as well, as something like, when is this going to be amazing? And every time I look at it, it is amazing. But then you look at it a week later and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the problem is that once the novelty wears off, then what, right? And this is for a completely new platform or way of interacting, storytelling, playing games, whatever it is. It takes a while for people to figure it out. And the example that I always give when I give talks or I'm talking to my class is in the early days of film, the first films were here's a train pulling into a station. Right. Here's people leaving a factory. Look, we're on a train. It's all these like really early films. And by the way, they're using AI to enhance and colorize those, like to basically take them from kind of the crappy film up to like 4K. And it's kind of amazing. If you want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, you can find all that on YouTube. Kind of going back. But it was kind of the novelty of it. And if we're going to compare that to VR, those were like, look, you're on a roller coaster. Look, you're on a big swing. Look, you're falling. You're getting, all these kind of like very quick, visceral experiences. But once they're done, they're kind of done. You're not going to spend $400, $500, $600 so that you can ride a virtual roller coaster.
Right.
You could go ride a roller coaster. So looking at film, it kind of had this evolution of, okay, now we want to tell stories. Well, how do we tell stories? Well, we know plays. Mm-hmm. So the first narrative films were, here's the camera, here's a play, and they'd film it.
Right. Everything's going to take place right in front of you. That's it.
And if you look at a lot of those early films, they're clearly like on a stage, and it's a cardboard cut, or not cardboard, but cutouts and things like that, and it's staged the same way, and everything. Even if they happen to do cuts, everybody's pretty much from head to probably their knees. Like there's no real close-ups and things like that. And it took about 20 years, well, maybe not quite 20 years, of people working with it and experimenting and trying different things for that to become, for the language of film to really come fully into itself and really distinguish itself from other forms of narrative storytelling. So it started out as just plays and became something completely distinct from plays. So as we can see, plays are different from movies, are different from books, are different from television, everything like that. They all have their own distinct way of doing things. There's similarities, of course, but also big differences. So we're kind of at the stage right now of we are still really filming plays. You're starting to see a little bit more of a breakout on that, people trying some different things. But eventually, VR is going to have to become its own thing, or it's just going to be a novelty.
So explain, because this is the question that I know comes up with me, and I think a lot of people when you start talking about VR, you've got a 360-degree experience that's filmed or live, then you have virtual reality, and then you have augmented reality, and they kind of move in and out between each other and get confused and called something else. So is a 360-degree experience the same as VR or no?
When you're talking about the 360-degree experience, you're talking about sort of the VR movies, right? So, or sporting events or things like that, where you put the headset on, you're kind of watching, you feel like you're in the environment, which you
Right.
kind of do and kind of don't.
Yeah. You can kind of see where the seams line up between all the different camera
Yeah, a lot of
connections.
times, and because of how much data it actually takes to do these, you can't really do 3D at this point, or at
Mm-hmm.
least they haven't been doing a lot of 3D. I'm sure there's some. So you get a little bit of that feeling of you're kind of watching something inside of a hamster ball.
Right. Yeah, it's a novelty. It's cool, but sometimes you're like, eh.
But again, it's kind of one of those things that it was something people were very bullish on for a while, including like narrative experiences. But that's at least at this point fallen out of favor because again, we're trying to take something we know and adapt it to a new medium. With a film, I'm dictating what you're looking at. Here's this person, you are watching them speak because it's a critical moment. Then here's this other person, here's a wide shot, and you're getting a sense of what's happening. Whereas within VR, you could have the two people talking to you in front of you, and you're like, whoa, what's this over here? Which is what happens. You can't actually force people to pay attention to what's going on in front of them. You can't, and you miss something.
Yeah, I remember when that was the new hotness 10 years ago is we're all going to make VR films, and it's like, well, now if you're going to direct it, you gotta go back and, like you said, study plays, and how do you direct a play, and how do you have audio cues. And I was looking at a Civil War reenactment before we talked, just to kind of refresh my memory. And you're right. The first thing I did was, oh, they're talking, but I want to look somewhere else and see what they're doing. I want to see the guy behind him yawning, and why is he yawning, and
Right, or should I
what
be
happened.
looking at the guy behind them? Maybe that yawn is a critical narrative moment or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And now I lost the train of thought, and I don't know where I'm going and what's happening, and I'm going to go to the next video.
Yeah. So what people are kind of experimenting with that is you're not really going to have I'm just going to sit and watch this happen in front of me. If you've ever done or heard of like the murder mysteries they'll do at hotels sometimes,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
like a live action thing where you have to walk around and find the clues and talk to the right
Yeah.
people and all this stuff like that, that's a little bit closer to what we can actually do in VR. It's a little bit more viable to do it that way because it is by its own nature interactive. It's just not
Okay.
going to be super passive on that.
Okay.
This may ultimately change. There's still plenty of people working with this stuff. I actually don't work in that space, so who knows what they're actually doing that might be new and interesting there. But the general consensus is that this is not the right platform for narrative storytelling in the same sense of like movies, plays, television, things like that.
Okay. Because it did kind of seem to come and go, and everything
Yeah,
was Jaunt VR and GoPro arrays and little pocket 360 things you put up everywhere, and
yeah.
wow.
And there may very well still be use for that, especially now that we are in the age of plague. If you want to go to a concert, maybe somebody's got standing there with the basketball camera and you got a front row seat and
Right.
all that. This may be just me on that. I've always found it to be psychologically a little bit weird
Mm,
sometimes. So they
sure.
actually did a really cool thing where they filmed actually Joan Jett in VR.
Okay.
But rather than being in the audience, they put the camera like right next to her on stage.
Oh wow.
So you're kind of like, oh, there's Joan Jett. And at the same time, you're going, I'm somewhere I'm not actually supposed to be.
Yeah.
I'm actually not supposed to be standing here. This is really awkward. And especially if you're not used to people staring at you, there's the audience too. So
Yeah.
I think there's still a sense of we don't quite know how this is going to work out. I have maintained that sports will eventually be a huge thing for that. And
Yeah.
I actually still think that because it's kind of the perfect medium. Like, okay, here now you're on the 50-yard line,
Hmm.
and you can watch the game that way. Or if like, oh, the action's down that way, I can click a button and fade out, fade in, and I'm suddenly down right on the goal line.
Right.
And you can do that in basketball too. You can bounce. They've done a couple broadcasts, not broadcasts, but a couple of experiences like that where you can go around to different spots and watch the same game. It still has a little bit of a ways to go on that. You're talking about AR and VR, so and we'll cut over there, but when you can actually maybe see a little bit of what's going on around you while you're watching this so that I can grab my whatever beverage, adult or otherwise, I happen to be enjoying while I'm watching the game, that's going to make a big difference because the user experience, that's kind of a new term within games and technology, but has actually been around for a while. You got to sort of recognize why people are doing what they're doing.
Okay.
We don't really watch sports to sit in rapt attention.
Right. Right.
And also you got your buddies with you and everybody's yelling and screaming. You got big bowls of chips and
Yeah, you're starting to tell stories, delusions of grandeur,
yeah,
and making fun of the bad play.
right. But I put this on, I'm cutting out all that, and I've got no idea where the potato chips are, and I just poked the dog in the eye when I was trying to reach for him. So we got a little ways to go before we figure out how to set this up so that people actually want to use it, that it actually takes this already familiar, enjoyable, fun, relaxing experience and makes it a little bit better,
Okay.
as opposed to just making it different and maybe not better.
Okay, so I think we've poo-pooed on virtual reality a lot now.
Well, it's a certain type of it. And I mean,
Yeah.
virtual reality definitely is not there yet
Okay.
on there. So the filmed experiences, I don't think it's been dropped, but they're definitely back to the drawing board.
Okay.
But
Okay.
even with, say, like VR games and such, that's another one we're still trying to kind of figure out. The term killer app is one that gets thrown around a lot. That really just means it's what you will actually go buy this new technology to actually do or play. So way back in the day with the Apple II, it was just spreadsheets. That was no, seriously, that was the big selling point.
Right. Right.
And especially, you kind of laugh like who would do that, but if you're an accountant,
Yeah.
Some
They
type of
did
business
change the
creature.
world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because before it was this gigantic piece of paper, a pencil, and an eraser, and then it's like, nope, you can change the number, and it'll update it, and it'll save you an hour right there, and that's when you're going to drop the money for that.
Yeah.
With game platforms, we've typically had to have a game of some type that you're going to drop money for the new PlayStation or the new Xbox.
Okay.
With VR, we don't really have that. There's good games out there, and don't get me wrong about that, but we don't really have that one where you're going, oh, how much? Okay,
Okay.
shut up and take my money kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not quite there yet, in part because they are fun, but they don't really feel like necessarily anything really new, and we are also still learning how to get people to interact with them. There really is a problem with suddenly I've taken away your hands, you can't see them anymore, and we have to do all this, and we haven't quite figured it out yet.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense though. But that makes a lot of sense in how things with VR that we talk about and we see and everyone's like, yeah, but everybody has the one friend out of a
Sure.
group of 5 that has the VR. And it's like, okay, we'll play it at a dinner party or one afternoon, and okay, no, I'm good now. I don't want to do it just yet. But it is still super appealing.
Sure.
It's still this thing that is so, you want everybody wants to champion it. And it seems like now with like the Quest 2, going even back to Oculus, that is VR something that is better as a gaming experience or better as a learning experience? Because that seems to be, to what I've been seeing, and what where people are kind of splitting is experience for learning and experience a game, or are they one and the same?
Well, it can be both. It's really not necessarily one or the other.
Okay.
For if you're talking just straight up education, I think it could be amazing, for a variety of reasons, actually. So, number one, if you put somebody in VR, like let's say in a classroom environment, you have their undivided attention.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever else is going on, whether it's their phone or, the adorable person sitting next to them or whatever, the sun outside, the squirrel on the tree, you know, I can only speak for myself, but my experience in school, K through 12, is I want to pay attention to anything but what's going on in front of the classroom.
Right. Anything is welcome at this point.
I was a reluctant student, to be sure, but you could put somebody in that and you have their undivided attention. So everybody thinks of like, well, you could go to ancient Rome and be in there and you could be in the environment, which is nice. I don't know how much that would actually teach anybody anything, but the questions we have to answer is going to be, how do we teach people algebra in VR?
Okay.
How do we take advantage of this tech and do this in VR? We don't know yet. The other thing is, that I think is actually an underappreciated potential aspect of it is with all the issues that we have with dilapidated schools, trying to maintain, poor school districts, rural school districts. A lot of these, it costs money to build a school, and it really costs a lot of money to maintain a school. And then it really costs more money to completely fix one from the ground up. And if you've ever done VR, your brain kind of accepts what it's looking at. You can put somebody in a different environment and they'll accept it. You could change the environment somebody's learning in really easily that way. And it doesn't have to be isolating. If you've read the book Ready Player One, their description of the school is actually very interesting in how they would actually do things on there. And I don't think the technology may not necessarily be there to support that just yet, but it's on its way. And I do think it's a possibility to enhance the learning experience at relatively low cost. Again, maybe.
Yeah.
Free advice is worth what you pay for it. But there is that possibility of using it to teach K through 12 more effectively.
As you talk about that, it does make sense. I mean, I've got a little kid now, and you're trying to teach him something, and it's always, you always have that argument. Like, you have to say it, you have to have them do it, you have to have them do it by themselves. Then you have to leave the room so they can do it, and that doesn't really change as we get older. If you're high school all the way up to college, you need somebody to show you what to do, and it's like, no, let me do it and screw it up, and then I can see in a virtual world, when you create a safe space, that can be far more faster, I guess.
It could be. I don't have any evidence or proof or studies or anything like that, so this is just me off the top of my head. But there is the potential to make the time that you spend learning something more effective. That you are more focused and immersed in it, and maybe you'll absorb it better. Well, again, I could be wrong.
No, it's interesting because we were just talking about 360, where you could see absolutely everything and you can't focus, but using the same concept to hyper focus you,
right,
and strip away everything,
right,
and get you to see something that a concept. We always see people with VR. It's always something medical based is the most go-to thing, where I can now examine the inside of the lung, and there's nothing there to stop me from examining this lung, and I can learn all about this lung faster than I ever could now. It does make sense in that flip concept that it can become something of a better teaching tool. Where do you see now, because you're teaching the software development or the script writing for VR?
More the design for it than
The design
anything
for
else.
VR. Okay.
So the technology is actually fairly easy to work with.
Okay.
If you know how to use a game engine, you can design for VR. So Unity, you open up Unity, you download a Unity package, you import it, you hit play, and you're in VR.
Oh, wow.
That's not
Okay.
an exaggeration. It's actually that easy.
Right.
Unreal is basically set. You click a checkbox for VR, and you're off at developing in VR.
Oh, wow.
So in the scripting, whether you're doing scripting for Unity or Blueprint and Unreal or more programming, there's nothing really that different about it.
Because these programs are still somewhat WYSIWYG or even further into coding.
Yeah, it's a little further into it, but it's nothing we don't really already do. So ultimately, it's, you're looking at a stereoscopic image. You're basically just developing for a different kind of monitor.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's nothing really that, the controls and everything, but we've dealt with controls. So the hard part is, what are we actually going to do with it? Because number one, it's not the holodeck, at least not yet. And it's not what you see in movies, and it's
It's
fun.
not Minority Report yet. It's not Lawnmower Man.
No. So nothing quite like that, or when people go into VR, or Sword Art Online, where you're completely into it and everything like that. So I think there's a little bit of letdown in terms of what it actually is, but you have to learn to kind of find out what the strengths are and actually design for something people want to do and actually want to stay in for a while. And we're still working on that.
Where do you start with that design? So if I'm a student coming in going, okay, I want to do some VR, and I know that's a very loaded question, but what are some of the
I've heard
that. What are some of the things that students need to start thinking about when they want to choose that VR path? What are the fundamentals for VR?
A lot of them are going to just be the same as what you would do for any kind of design. You have to know how to kind of craft an experience, what's fun, what's not, the basic technical skills of it all, but not even just for VR, but if you want to work with emerging technology, there are principles that you kind of have to embrace even harder than you do with, say, like what do they call it, like agile development or what have you. So one of them is fail faster.
Okay.
So the more you fail, the more you find out what doesn't work, and you have to be able to iterate on that. When I do have students come into class, I've made very stringent requirements on, you have to be able to script. You have to have at least a year of scripting coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come in, I even tell them this is a scripting heavy class.
Okay.
So because I've got an idea, well, great, now you have to go do it. The controls don't do what you want to do, so you're gonna have to script your own control scheme, and the locomotion makes people sick, so you got to figure something else out there, and you have to be able to iterate on it. So you have to learn to work quickly and make adjustments and changes. So that's true of pretty much game and in general software development, but I think for emerging technology even more so, because you're going to fail way more than you're going to succeed in that.
Okay.
So that's part of it. The other thing is you have to be really willing to think about not just what you want to do with it. Okay, so if you want to be an artiste, put your beret on and everything like that, you can do whatever you want to. It doesn't really matter. And there's some very cool stuff out there where people did some really neat, kind of like artsy projects and things like that. But you really have to kind of take a harder look at how people use things, kind of the user experience that I was speaking of before. Mm-hmm. If we go back to when Microsoft introduced the Kinect, which never really took off for a variety of reasons, one of it was not really great technology, but this idea that you're going to use your body to control the game,
Yeah.
and it works about 70. Even the developers will tell you it worked about 70%, which is not, which is nowhere near good enough for a control system. But another thing they didn't take into account is how do people actually want to play games.
Yeah.
So there's certainly room for, like party games where we're dancing or we're
Hmm.
doing something physical in motion. Think of like Guitar Hero. When
Yeah.
that was popular, every freaking party I went to had to play
Right.
Guitar Hero.
Right. And We Connect and
Yeah,
and all the Wii stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Even the Wii stuff too, which also kind of faded as sort of a novelty. But a big part of the reason is that when you come home and you've had a long day and you just want to relax, you want to play a game, you're looking to sit there and
Just veg out. Yeah. I don't want to do calisthenics at 10 o'clock at night after working
exactly.
all day. Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
don't get me wrong, there is room to do for physicality within games on there.
Hmm.
So you can certainly develop for that, but a lot of the games didn't take that into consideration. And there's other practical ideas too. So I love looking at the old advertisements for the Wii because they show families doing it with a living room that was bigger than my entire apartment.
Right. Yeah, you got 15 feet of space from the couch to your
Yeah,
massive television. Like, wow, I don't have 15 feet in my bedroom.
right. You had to be back, I think, 6 feet to make it work properly. And to me, 6 feet back was I've
Yeah,
just
that
fallen over my coffee table and possibly killed
right.
myself.
Yeah.
So, do you really want to rearrange the room every time you want to play a game? It's kind of one of those practical considerations that I don't think they really thought through well enough on there.
Okay.
So, VR is kind of the same way. The first Oculus Quest was a huge step in the right direction for that. But this idea that for the previous versions where you actually did have to have cameras, like with the Vive, the
Hmm.
first commercial Oculus Quest kit, and some of the others, where I've got cameras all over the room, I've got this space kind of walled off, and I'm gonna, putting on this headset and I'm blocking off the world, and I hope I don't stomp on my cat or, you know,
Right.
inadvertently punch somebody in the face or things like that.
It's extreme. It seems beyond aspirational at this point to even begin to play this.
Right. And again, that's not to say that you can't, but the people who are going to actually go through the motions of creating the space and doing all this stuff are going to be the enthusiasts, the true believers, the
Mm-hmm.
early adopters, the people who just this new technology is just the best. It's not going to be for that broad audience who are going to go, I have to do all of what? You know what? No, give me my PlayStation controller and I'm just going to do that.
Yeah. That makes sense because then that was when the Oculus kind of was it the phone usage and the little cardboard holder for the phone with that first, or was it the Oculus that was first, or was it kind of together?
The very first Oculus developers kit was the first one kind of in the modern era. We had versions of virtual reality before that, dating way back. In fact, if you watch the Lord of the Rings extras,
Mm-hmm.
they actually have one scene where Peter Jackson is in VR doing I think the cave troll scene with
Oh,
like a
okay.
virtual camera where so he could actually like look and see everything that was going on and place the camera.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, some of the jib operators would have these little glasses that had one camera over the eye, and they could kind of see what was happening.
Yeah, so there's different versions of it, but with what they refer to as the DK1 for the developers kit 1, that was the first one. The phone thing followed not too long after,
Okay.
or maybe almost kind of at the same time, possibly. Um, and the phone was kind of a good gateway for a lot of people, but the problem was that actually there were a lot of problems. So, number one, you want to play a game on your phone? Where's your controller?
Right.
You had potentially like the one switch up here. If you were really ambitious, you could pair a controller, a Bluetooth controller to your headset, or I'm sorry, your phone, and how many people are actually going to do that?
Sure.
almost nobody. And it could have been more of a gateway, except again, there was just never really enough compelling content for people to do, and content is always king.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of like little novelty experiences, like I said, a lot of roller coasters, maybe outdoorsy scenes, little snippets of concerts. Somebody did like a Cirque du Soleil thing, which was neat, but I watched about 5 minutes of it once and then I was done with it.
Yeah, it does kind of harken back to some of those 3D movies from the 70s and things like that, where it was
Right.
like, with bats flying at you and arrows coming at you. It's like,
Right.
great. I don't think this is the world's greatest spaghetti Western, but it feels like I'm there for a little bit.
Right.
That kind of brings back that question again. What is worth doing then? And what is worth the process of getting into VR? What makes it so much of a thing that should be developed and should be worked on? Not to make you the evangelist and the apologist for VR, but that cynical question of why am I doing this?
Well, if somebody was coming to me going, why do I want to buy an Oculus Quest 2, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
which is awesome, by the way. Actually, I can't say it's awesome, but the way they're approaching it is really awesome. Like I said, the first Quest was a huge leap forward for the technology, for actually, in terms of user experience, getting it into somebody's hands or the public's hands, because there were no cameras involved. It was what we call inside-out tracking, where the headset is using lasers to track the controllers and your environment. So you don't have to have an elaborate setup. You don't really have to do much of anything. You basically just put it on and you're ready to go.
Okay.
And then you're done, you take it off. The end. So the Quest 2 was another step in the right direction. And if I was a developer, and I am, it's really exciting because it's inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. So it's $300, and I have no inside information on as to whether or not this is true, but they have to be taking a loss on every headset they sell.
Sure. Okay. That's not surprising.
Yeah. So with the tech that they have in there, with the chipset that they have, there's no way that they're turning a profit on this. So they're bullish on the software, and they believe that once they actually get this out into the public, they can turn it into its own ecosystem. So for developers, that's an exciting thing. It's not so exciting that you have to be logged into Facebook to use it, which people are really not happy about. And I'm one of those.
That's a whole different can of
That's a whole different
evil blood sucking worms.
But on a consumer level, if someone's going to say, well, why should I bother? On one hand, it's a little bit hard to answer that, because there's not really a whole lot of stuff where I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is something like you've never seen before. Try this. There's cool stuff in there. Again, there's really cool games and all that. But it's a little bit hard to say, here's the killer app. Here's the thing that's going to change the way you look at games and life and everything else on that.
Okay.
There's neat stuff. So Half-Life, I actually had an interesting time with that. So you're familiar with Half-Life 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So they came out with a VR Half-Life 2 game. It was a prequel game. Mm-hmm. It wasn't Half-Life 3 or Half-Life 2 Part 3, unfortunately, which is what we all really wanted, but, we'll probably never see it. And they did some really cool stuff with it. It did well. I don't think it wasn't the explosion that I think they were hoping for. And I think part of that was, this is something I actually came across in class that I was kind of like, what? If you're a little bit older, as, me,
some of us are.
Half-Life 2 is almost a mythological game. It's known for being in like the top tier of, like first-person story shooter games of all time.
Right.
And I was talking about this in one of my classes, and they're like, Half-Life? Oh yeah, I've heard of that. I was like, Oh, which makes sense. It's about like what, 15 years old at this point?
Right, which is at least two generations or three if you're thinking in technology.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's so beyond.
Yeah.
It's not Pokemon Go for crying out loud.
No, and we need our Pokemon Go. So AR had Pokemon Go, and even that was barely AR.
Yeah.
You know, that was a little bit of the coming out party. But what's the funny thing is they've kind of not really been able to build on that. I think they tried a Harry Potter one like that
Right.
that didn't
And
really
didn't
do
nothing
all that
nothing
great. I think that was
yeah.
there was a little bit of like, I think we did this already
Yeah.
kind of thing. So
But to get back to then, like if I'm a student, I want to develop for VR. What are you wanting as a developer? What are you wanting to see students and entry level developers start thinking about? Because you mentioned scripting and user experience, but what makes the user experience different, or more importantly, what is the user experience people need to think about when they're developing games and then tacking it into a VR system?
to some extent, I don't know. If I really had an answer for that, I'd be off making a bazillion dollars making a game. So we kind of know, but kind of don't all at the same time. So there's a little bit of everybody kind of comes in. There's almost this idea that it's going to be this wish fulfillment.
Okay.
Like, I'm finally going to get to do this. I'm not just going to be playing it on a screen, I'm going to be in that world.
Okay.
And that's certainly a big part of it. But number one, that's really hard to create,
Mm-hmm.
like kind of total interactivity. So if you want to make games for it, you have to remember that we're making games.
Okay.
We're crafting experiences, we're not necessarily trying to simulate reality.
Okay. That seems like a big distinction in the final product a lot of
Yeah,
times. Where it's like, oh, that's a cool game, but it doesn't look cool. Well, it's not going to look cool yet.
right.
It seems to be the answer.
It'll get there, of course. But even if you take something I'm trying to think of like maybe what's like the most hyper realistic type of game, maybe something like Call of Duty, when it's not when they're not people flying around with jetpacks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That they're trying
But
to
yeah,
make it like as close to combat as you can. Well,
mm-hmm.
it's actually not. We still have all these game mechanics and ideas in it of everything from maps to having, like the gun pop up right in the center of your screen and things like that. And with VR, especially because it has that feeling of presence, and we can talk about this, immersion and presence are two different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where you
definitely.
feel like you're there, and now it's like, oh, well, I should just have a gun like I would normally do, and I'm going to shoot, and I'm going to just, instead of clicking a button to open this door, I'm going to actually grab the door and open it. And we may someday get to that point, but it doesn't really work like that now for sure.
Okay.
In fact, it tends to feel very awkward for that.
Is that immersion more important, or is it something that people are striving for to see if it will be important?
So within games, immersion is very important, and that's
Okay.
basically across the board. I think people confuse immersion with presence. Presence is the term we use when we say you feel like you're there. Like,
Okay.
you put this on and it's like, oh my God, I'm around. And that's a really powerful experience. And if you've ever been in VR and like been looking around here, kind of like, this is the coolest place ever.
Yeah.
And you take the headset off, it's a little like coming out of a dream.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Absolutely.
almost like jarring, like, oh yeah, I am just sitting here. I am in my living room or the classroom or whatever.
Yeah, there's that weird physicality if you're like,
Yeah.
wow, something just left my body.
Yeah. There is kind of this weird shift. And I think that for me, that was one of those things that really like kind of blew me away when I first tried it. Immersion, on the other hand, just means you are totally mentally engaged.
Okay.
Nothing to do with VR. If you've ever played a game and you've liked it, at some point we've been immersed in it. You've had that complete
Right.
focus. So you can be
Okay.
completely immersed in Zelda. You can be completely immersed in Candy Crush. You can be completely immersed in Call of Duty. You can be completely immersed in Angry Birds. I've been so immersed in Angry Birds, especially on public transportation, I am lucky nobody ever stole my phone. I've literally been like, there should have been a bullseye on me. I've been playing it, standing on the train. Somebody could have grabbed my phone, run off, and it would have been 30 seconds before I realized what happened. Like, I don't know. But immersion presence are not the same thing. Presence within VR is relatively easy.
Okay.
It's kind of how it seems to be, and if you ever talk to somebody who's more psychologically learned than I am, they could probably explain that to you. But you kind of put this thing on, and even if it's cartoony or what have you, you kind of start to accept it. You sort of accept this as your environment. Immersion, you do get immersed, there is engagement, but it also gets broken by bad interaction. So if I was going to compare that to a regular console game or even a mobile game, that would be if the controls don't work properly. So if Angry Birds was great in the sense that you'd swipe and launch the bird and off it would go, and it pretty much worked the way you'd expect it to. So if it didn't do that, that would be an immersion breaker. Same thing with any kind of game. It should generally be intuitive.
Because you're not looking down at the controller. You should be looking, your eyes are locked in on what you're doing. Like you said, the cat could run by and you would never see it.
Right, which has happened to us all. And if you were born after 1990, game controller is practically an extension of yourself.
Yeah.
You know how to use that. We don't really have that in VR just yet. So a lot of the things people have tried and different games have tried, especially with accurate motion controllers, which is kind of a dream come true. I won't pick on any specific games here, but I've played ones where you have to go up to the door and click on it and actually open the door, and it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it seems like somebody overthought.
Yeah,
it sounds like a bad Dungeons and Dragons storyline. Somebody who's never played Dungeons and Dragons well, like me, is going, you open the door, you turn the door to the left, you unlock the door, then you pull the door. You're like, okay, I get it. I go through the door.
Yeah, but even so, there's a video series called Extra Credits, which, by the way, I recommend for anybody really interested in games because they go into a lot of really great topics. But they did one about, and this was in regards to the Kinect, but the uncanny valley of controls. So with the uncanny valley being, I'm looking at something and it's kind of human, but there's something horribly wrong with it. If you've seen like bad CG or anything like that, it can really be
as we all have. Yeah.
So, or like animatronic things that are close, but they're kind of herky jerky, and it's a little bit like, it's possessed, I'm leaving. But what they put out there, and I agree with them, is that there is an uncanny valley of controls. If it's telling you to do something that you're familiar with, like opening a door, and it doesn't work right and it doesn't feel right, that takes you out of it completely.
You're just done.
Yeah. So that's where it kind of breaks the immersion, and it starts to actually break presence as well too. So especially with motion controls, there's sort of this, with great power comes great responsibility sort of thing there. So we kind of know how to use it. It's really cool, and we can point, and everybody wants to, for UI, you're clicking and you're doing the pointers, and mostly we find out just how much our hands shake when you're trying to point. That's, the virtual line's extending out 3 feet, and you're just like, how much coffee did I have this morning?
Yeah.
Sort of thing on there. So, and again, there's room for motion controlled games. Beat Saber is a great example of that. It leans into the strengths and does a really nice job of making a very fun experience. But if we want to go deeper, if we want it to be like you're playing D&D, or you're in Call of Duty, or you're playing Skyrim in virtual reality, we have to rethink how you actually interact with the environment. And this idea of, well, we can't highlight things anymore, everything you have to lean in and actually click and grab, I don't think is true, because And again, this goes back to the extra credits. I don't want anybody to think I'm like stealing ideas. It's called the Connect Disconnect if anybody wants to look it up.
Yeah.
It's really good. But essentially, if you're using a controller, that's tool usage, and we understand tool usage. So again, that we know you don't run by pushing forward on a controller, but that's tool usage, and we can make that mental connection. We can do the same thing in VR and still have presence and immersion. In fact, that will probably ultimately enhance immersion if you're not necessarily flailing around all the time.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, that seems like, if you're going to start doing VR stuff, it almost seems like you're going backwards or starting simpler in a game design system than if you were doing it in a traditional, game engine. It seems like you're just becoming, you're taking things down to the most simple and basic concepts long before you get into something complicated.
Yeah, for anything new like that, you do have to keep it very simple. So to kind of harken back to the olden days of yore for video games, the first attempt at a commercial video game was this one called Computer Space. This was in, I think, 1971.
Okay.
They attempted this. It was basically an adaptation of one that they did at MIT. And it was this game, and it had like 4 different buttons on it and competitive, and it was a failure, in part because that was going to be too complicated for the time.
Mm-hmm.
People did not have the biases for that sort of thing that we do today of like, oh, buttons, I know how to control this. Pong was the first really successful one, in part because it was a knob.
Yeah, one thing.
It was one thing, and knobs were kind of gone at this point. But your TV had a knob, your oven had a knob, everything had a knob. We know what a knob is.
I'm laughing because as you talk about usability, it's one of those things that we all think when you really study usability and user experience. It's not people think, oh, it's just technology. Because no, there's a whole usability lab on how your refrigerator works.
Right. Yeah. There are deep studies on this.
Yeah, which is fascinating, but it's like, it kind of makes sense when you start going, TV had a knob, washing machine had a knob, games got a knob. I can turn clockwise and counterclockwise. I'm smart.
Right. But even then you go, oh, I get it, and I'm off and I can play. So we're kind of going backwards in the sense of now we have these new control systems that we don't have these built-in biases to use. And let's see, I've got one. I got these right here. They're similar.
Right. The hand connector glove things are,
but they're different. They're different all at the same time. And I'll throw this out there as something I don't necessarily have an answer for. So similar to a gamepad, right?
Right.
You got the 2 joysticks. You got kind of a comparable amount of buttons. It's not that different. But is this one controller or 2?
Right.
So, and psychologically speaking, 2 controllers is very different than 1, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Anybody who's played an instrument, it goes back to, are you left-handed or right-handed?
Yeah.
How do you make 2 different hands do 2 different things at the same time?
Right. So if now we're designing for games, are we designing for a game that has 1 controller like a gamepad, or are we designing for a game that has 2 controllers?
Right.
And do I have to keep in mind, well, this one's for locomotion, this one's for interaction. How can I cross them over? So it's
how do I do something simple like scratch my butt in the middle of the game and not kill myself?
Right.
Yeah.
And there is that too. And I mean, if you go to play a game and you want to have you're thirsty, you probably got your beverage right there.
Right. Do you unshackle yourself from the game to do it, or do we have it piped into our veins intravenously, as science fiction has led us to believe is how games are supposed to work? We're not answering a lot of questions about VR that I've written up, but it does answer a lot of concepts in that why it's important. Can you tell me briefly, because I know you've got a strong opinion on a lot of this, of what VR is capable of doing now and what VR should be, what we should be working on outside of games? Because we talked a little bit about games and then learning, But what do you see as some of the pluses of VR in the nearer future?
I think it has a lot of potential for training, of course, and education, like we talked about. I think that there is the potential. Somebody who was not me once called it an empathy machine,
Mm, okay.
with the idea of now I could be actually in somebody else's shoes and experience the world through their eyes, which I think is entirely possible.
That's scary, but brilliant, but scary.
Much of the insanity that we're dealing with today, it has a lot to do with the fact that we are kind of collectively lacking a certain amount of empathy.
Very true.
So, and there's been some attempts to do this. Somebody did kind of a documentary series where it was a VR film thing, but they took it to a refugee camp with kind of the intention of look at what this is actually like, understand this.
Yeah, different type of journalism
Yeah,
aspect.
and will people do that? Maybe. I mean, people watch documentaries about stuff that's unpleasant all the time.
Sure.
And I think there's the potential for, well, actually, I take it back. So I was going to talk about like relaxation and like it can put you in this natural environment, even though you have a 200 square foot studio apartment in San Francisco and feel like you're not there for a little while. But there is a doctor, I believe, at UCLA who has been using it to treat PTSD.
Right. That seems to come up a lot. That the PTSD aspect is a lot of people have been talking about that.
Yeah. So, and
Which almost seems like it's taking the to me it seems like it's taking all of the negative aspects of this technology and finding the best use for it.
sure.
It's making you uncomfortable to unwind a negative experience.
Yeah. And it's kind of amazing. It essentially is allowing them to re experience it in a safe environment,
Mm-hmm.
which for those who want to know more, consult, Google,
Yeah.
to find out more. I don't want to take a really good thing and reduce it to kind of a soundbite
Sure. Sure.
because it is really fascinating what he's doing with that, with the doctor, whoever it may be. There's potential for I think different kinds of psychological explorations on there. There's a gentleman, and his name escapes me. I'm so sorry, down at Stanford, who actually has a psychology background, who has been experimenting with VR. And I got to hear him speak. He's actually got a book out as well. I just cannot remember his name at the moment. But one thing he talked about that I've experienced as well is the idea of looking into a mirror and seeing somebody who's not yourself,
Ah.
like seeing a completely different form, and that's a weird one.
Okay. And that's beyond an avatar. That's something more experiential.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I experienced it the first time with a very basic early VR program that was going to let you like watch movies in VR, which
Mm-hmm.
by the way is awesome. But for whatever reason, I had a female avatar, and I was kind of like, "Wow, this is neat." And I looked down and saw the female body, and I was like, "Whoa, this is weird." You know,
This is great, but this is really weird. This got really weird very, very, very fast.
it's kind of jarring, but very interesting all at the same time. And how that could be used, I'm not sure. So, like, if you have something like VR chat, certainly you can have different avatars in there.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook is working on something like that too. If the video is to be believed, you're kind of this avatar with no legs that's just kind of floating around.
Uh-huh. Well, it's science fiction, so there always has to be something
Yeah,
odd and weird about it.
right.
So VR it is this thing that does need to be pushed and further studied and developed, and people need to learn how to do it and push these boundaries.
Sure. And there
Okay.
may not be much more to it than training and education and games. It may kind of stop there.
But those are pretty
Technology,
good things.
what's that?
Those are pretty. That's a pretty good call to action, though.
That's a pretty broad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
history is kind of littered with technology that was, oh, well, we did this. Well, let's tack this onto it too, and it'll be an enhancement and all this stuff like that, and it just never really works out that way.
Okay.
I'm sure, if you went back to the 90s and talked to somebody about the smartphones, they'll be like,
Yeah.
this will be great. We'll be more connected than ever. It'll be convenient. It'll enhance our lives and all this stuff like that. And it's like, you're not seeing the downside.
You're not reading enough science fiction. You don't understand what's happening. But you mentioned something and I just want to close it out with that because I want to have a nice up as we've been like, well, how's VR going to work? I don't know. But it's something that, we are in the time of COVID, and it was another thing that I had forgotten about, and it was VR movies. And now that movies are now no longer a theater experience for a undetermined amount of time. You said they were awesome. How are those VR movies awesome? What are you liking about them?
It's not so much VR movies, but watching movies in VR.
Watching movies in VR.
The first time I tried it, I was kind of blown away, actually, because you do get that weird sense of scale that you are kind of watching on this gigantic screen. And it's actually very relaxing.
Really?
It's that relaxing of I'm somewhere else. Kind of the same way of like I'm going to, part of maybe this says a lot about me. I like going to movies like at a matinee before noon on a Sunday.
So you literally want no one to be in this theater.
That's a great experience.
So you spending the $99 to rent out your AMC theater you are the target market for that.
Right. No, but that's not the only time I go. Watching something like the Avengers or Star Wars with a crowd who's into it is absolutely awesome too.
Yeah. I will back you up and go, yes, going to a movie theater alone is pretty awesome.
Yeah. But it's kind of that feeling of sort of like, I'm closed off. The world is kind of outside. I'm not home. I don't have to deal with all this stuff.
Sure.
I have to turn my phone off because they'll come get me if I don't.
Right.
Kind of thing of sort of this
dark, climate controlled, smells like popcorn, all the good things.
But I've left all the stuff outside. You kind of re-experience that. It is sort of that, you kind of get that sense of it too. Now, it's not because VR has sort of a limited field of view right now, you still kind of get that ski goggle effect. Mm-hmm. But once that opens up a little bit more, it's going to be kind of, I think it'll be even cooler to be able to do that. And as long as you don't mind looking dorky, it's great on a plane.
Well, I think as time goes by, I think all these dorky technology things are becoming less and less dorky. So I think that's good. Just to wrap it up for real, what are some things that you think for game design, just very quickly, as people are thinking about this, thinking about technology, thinking about game design, can you point them to anything that, a book, a story, a game, something that's going to have them go, this is what you want to start with if you want to venture down this, fabulously weird and wonderful world of games?
In terms of the actual tech or just inspiration or?
Inspiration, something that's going to give somebody that idea to go, I'm going down the right path. This is what I want to do.
So I would say for me, not the movie, the book, but Ready Player One.
Okay.
Book, not the movie. Book, not the movie.
Book, not the movie. Got it.
Was a huge one for me because even though it kind of paints the broad strokes, there was a lot of like, oh my God, it would be so freaking awesome to be able to do this, which is always a good place to start. You got to keep going after that. But really, for any kind of emerging technology, for anybody who likes to do all the stuff, if you're committed to being a modeler, probably don't really need to do VR. There's nothing against modelers, but it's
right. Not your thing yet.
But if you're a designer and you like the technology and you like problem solving, and maybe you like to do things a little bit differently, then it's one of those things that see what other people are doing, watch the videos, but don't be afraid to try your own thing. Your ideas are just as valid as anybody's. Like I said, I'm very opinionated on this stuff, but no one person is right about everything on this.
But that's refreshing, though. That's kind of cool, though. That's what you're saying. That there's so much out there. Just go for it.
Yeah, it's the frontier. Literally, you can try anything. It's like going back to the early days of film. It's like, well, should I film this? Like, yeah, you probably should. Who knows? See what'll happen.
Yeah.
If the urban legends are true, when the train came pulling into the station, people hit the ground.
Yeah.
People freaked out. So imagine if I'll just film this train pulling into the station, and then you show it and people lose their shit.
Yeah.
It's like, more. I got to do more.
Right. Yeah.
So you never really know what's quite going to land, and nobody's going to figure it out until we've tried it. So if you've got an idea that you think would be cool, go for it, honestly.
Yeah, that fear of failure is not an issue anymore.
It's very hard to be a creative person of any stripe if you're afraid of failing. Or actually, I'll take that back. If you let being afraid of failing stop you, because I think it's something we are all afraid of.
So there you go, a long-winded but very informative answer to the question of what makes VR important and how you prepare for a career in VR. And like more and more art and design careers that are on the rise, employers are always on the hunt for the next generation of talented and skilled creative professionals. And here at the Academy of Art, you will get those work-ready skills that employers want. You can study on-site in downtown San Francisco and, of course, anywhere in the world with our online programs. To request more information about our 40-plus areas of study in art and design, including game development, virtual reality, UX and UI design, and more, just visit our website at academyart.edu/creativemind. Again, I'm Bobby Brill. Thanks for listening.